Hi, everyone. Thanks, John, for joining and letting us know that we're broadcasting. It's Monday morning, at least here on the West Coast. I know it's lunchtime on the East Coast, and for those in the middle of the country, coffee time. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to wait another minute just to have folks join in, get everyone. Hopefully, everyone is having a great day so far, and welcome. We'll get started in just a second. We've got a really great program here. We've actually done this webinar or this topic at the BBCon Blackbaud conference last year. And it was a big hit there. So we figured more people might enjoy it. So we're really excited to have everyone join us. And as Roz has mentioned, you can drop questions and comments in the chat on the button. It is next to, well, I think share is probably off for most folks, but there's a button, it looks like a little talking bubble with 3 dots in it. That's where you can find the chat and put questions in there. So we'll wait maybe one more minute before starting. This will also be available via archive for folks. So you'll receive an archive in the mail for everyone who has signed up. All right, should we get started? I think we should. All right, Roz, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Beyond Bitcoin. Can blockchain be used for social good? This session is going to be just under an hour, panel style. We will have time for questions. You are encouraged to tweet if you're so inspired. You can use the hashtag blockchain for good, all letters, or hashtag DLT, letter 4 good. As far as webinar rules of the road, everyone other than panelists came in muted. That's just to manage background noise. So please feel free to drop questions, comments, etc. into chat throughout the session, and we'll have some points along the way to take those questions. If you happen to use the Q&A, I'm also keeping an eye on that, but to keep it simple, we'll just aim for chat. All right, so we'll get rolling. Our topic for the day is blockchain, also known as distributed ledger technology. Many of you have heard of cryptocurrency, but that's just one application of blockchain. Or, you know, people are getting more sophisticated. There's a lot has happened in the last year. Maybe you've been tracking some of its other uses, like identity management in crisis situations or supply chain management. And you're thinking about, how do I apply this to my work? So we can imagine lots of social good uses for this type of technology. If you cannot, or you've been struggling to, you should be able to by the end of the hour, because we're going to start high level with what is it, get everyone on the same page, and then dig into some real world use cases and land on how you can get started. I'm so pleased to share that we have 3 terrific panelists here to discuss blockchain's potential for social good with you today. And I'm going to start off by having our panelists introduce themselves. Do you want to, Cheryl, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Contee. I recognize some folks among the attendees, and thank you so much for joining us. Some of you could probably be hosting this, so it's an honor to have you on board. I am the CEO of Do Big Things. Do Big Things is a digital agency that is focused on new narrative and new tech for the new era that I think we all understand that we're living in. We work with causes and campaigns, not only around the country, but around the world. I'll hand it over to, Cordell.
Hi, everyone. I just assumed it was me next because of the alphabetical going there, CC and CC. I am Cordell Carter. I lead the Aspen Institute Socrates program, which is a global education forum for leaders where we are introducing them the values and ethics-based dialogue. I'm also an entrepreneur and as such serve on committees for 3 different blockchain startups. And so as I'm traveling around the world, I'm connecting with people all the time. They're doing amazing things and I love to tell their stories. Thus, I'm very happy to be here to tell part of those stories. Thank you.
And I'm Cameron Black. I'm a distinguished engineer at Blackbaud. For those of you not familiar with Blackbaud, they're the world's basically leading cloud provider of social good. They serve the entire social good community, which includes nonprofits, foundations, corporations, education institutions, healthcare, faith-based communities, and also the individuals and that donate and volunteer to support them. I currently work in the corporations and foundations area, and we strive to connect grant makers with grant seekers basically through the use of purposeful philanthropy, which is basically tracking and measuring impact and desired outcomes, and then radiating that information out throughout the rest of the philanthropic community.
I love the title Distinguished Engineer, by the way.
Yeah,
I'm very
comes with
jealous.
the top hat too, so.
Yes.
Well, exactly, as opposed to not distinguished, like, less distinguished.
And I'm Rosalyn, and I'm the Senior Director of Blackbaud Labs. We are an internal incubator, and I am your MC and host for the day. So with that, I would love to go around and just ask you all the first question, which is, how did you get interested in blockchain, and do you have a personal story or a connection to the topic? Why don't we start with Cordell?
Sure. So I was introduced, oh man, this would have been probably 2009, the actual concept. I don't believe it was being called blockchain at the time, but I was a labor negotiator, to be frank, and I was trying to normalize a lot of data and financial documents all related to one very large teacher union contract at a school district. And it was just these immense documents, because it's not just a contract, it's all of these other documents that create financial transactions. And I was like, surely you have just one general ledger for this. And they were like, oh, there's some guys at University of Washington talking about that. And so I went to talk to those guys, and they started telling me about what could be. They were speaking very conceptual terms. Now we know those things to be blockchain. And so the spark for the interest was started, 11 years ago. And now, of course, it's a whole new world.
Pretty cool. Cheryl, you want to talk about your connection?
Sure. Well, I've been following blockchain for a while. Of course, the most famous application is crypto, and I knew some folks and have some friends who are involved there. But it was really South by Southwest last year, 2018. I was there actually to speak on a very different topic on entrepreneurship, digital startups, and diversity and inclusion. But on the lips of everyone was blockchain, but not just blockchain. There was also like blockchain, cannabis. Can you use blockchain to fund your cannabis startup? And then below that was democratizing AI. From what I'm told from team members who've been out there to South by this year, blockchain is still very much on everyone's list. And so I have gotten involved since at that time in stemchain.io, which we'll talk about later, the Hyperledger Social Impact Working Group. I think that blockchain in many ways, much like cell phones and the app marketplace, are a solution in search of its problems. And I think there are a lot of problems that will be solved once we are able to add blockchain in the mix over the next 5 to 10 years.
My personal connection to blockchain is mainly in cryptocurrencies. I've dabbled in it for several years. I even bought some real early Bitcoin when it was still on novelty. I think I spent $15 when they were 5 cents a piece. I've since unfortunately lost that wallet. But when I really became in blockchain overall is with the advent of the smart contracts stored on the blockchain, and how it seems like it could be a good fit into our goal of measuring impact and outcomes in a more transparent and decentralized way. I'll touch on smart contracts a little bit later in the talk.
Adriana, I just realized you're clicking through for us. Can you click forward a few to 4? We've gone past the intros. And just a little about my interest. I mentioned that I run an internal incubator at Blackbaud called Blackbaud Labs. And what part of what we do is intake new product concepts and explore new technology. And we had a engineer, it's probably 18 months ago now, submit a great proposal around smart contracts, and that's something we've been exploring and did some internal proof of concept, and that kind of got us thinking inside Blackbaud about what was possible. Okay, so the next, let's see. Okay, we're going to go one more. So, thanks. Before we get into our panel discussion topics, I'd like to take just a minute, literally 1 minute, and share a what is blockchain kind of 101 explainer video. I'll preface this by saying that there are so many explainer videos out there that the one that Wired did this last year actually starts out by making fun of how many blockchain explainer videos there are out there. So I thought rather than us trying to reinvent the wheel here, we'd just start really simple. I like this one by author Michael Casey because it's just dead simple. Here's what this thing is without all the like cute drawings and stuff. So Adriana, roll that beautiful bean footage.
It's really a new method of record keeping. It's a ledger. It's a means of keeping transactions, keeping the record of transactions. But rather than doing this through a centralized mechanism, having one entity look after the books, it's a decentralized system, meaning that there are many, many computers that work in concert to produce what's called a distributed ledger, a shared ledger. And they sort of simultaneously and through a consensus algorithm all come to an agreement on what they think the truth should be, what the actual record of transactions should be. So rather than having to rely on one entity and the risks that come with that, the fallibility of the human beings that run it, the corruption, the potential breakdowns, the hacking attacks, and so forth, we have multiple different versions of it being collectively produced. It's this decentralization which is absolutely key to it, and it matters because record keeping is at the heart of how societies go through the process of figuring out how to trust each other to enter into economic exchange. And so it facilitates peer-to-peer exchange. People can now sort of, rather than have to rely on an intermediary, can trade directly with each other, and that's a very important development.
So record keeping at the heart of how society learns to trust each other. So where banks are intermediaries, you have intermediaries that hold contracts, you have intermediaries that validate our identity, that I passed a security check. There's all kinds of roles that intermediaries play in society today to allow us to interact in a trusted way with each other that blockchain presents an alternative for. If you want an explanation with all kinds of cute drawings and stuff, you can certainly search for that on the internet. But I like that real straightforward one. All right. So any other, why don't we go to the next slide there? Okay, so before we kind of move on to panel discussion questions, do we have any questions from the audience on kind of what is this blockchain 101 kind of stuff? Are you guys totally up to speed?
And again, please put them in the chat, not the Q&A. There is a chat button at the bottom of your screen.
All right, I'm not seeing anyone. I think we have a very educated audience. So we're gonna move on to the next one. So we're gonna go ahead and start on the panel discussion topics. So to tee up our next discussion topic, I wanted to share an interesting stat from the Stanford Social Innovation Review this past April, which in technology time is like 10 years ago, but still kind of useful and interesting. Blockchain initiatives dedicated to social impact are still at an early stage, still are, it's only a year. 34% were started in 2017 or later, 74% are still in pilot or idea stage. So this is like midway through last year. This was just, things were just getting started in terms of initiatives using blockchain for social impact. So here we are about a year later. The examples of blockchain in the social good sector are exploding. And while the buzz around ICOs and crypto more generally has kind of chilled compared to where we were a year ago, there has really been a big growing interest in and quite a few solid attempts at using blockchain for improving accountability, removing those corruptible middlemen along the supply chain. For example, getting needed supplies for refugees quickly, tracking NGO impact on the ground, or ensuring all the votes are counted in elections. So in this new world, 1 year in from everybody just starting to, crawl on this, my question to the panel, and we'll go around, what do you personally see as the most promising use cases for blockchain for social good? And maybe what are some examples of how blockchain's already impacting causes? Why don't we start with Cheryl?
Yeah, thanks, Roz. Can we go to the next slide, please? So some of you may have caught this article last year, and you don't normally think of Walmart as being a pioneer for social good for a lot of reasons. However, social good can be defined a lot of different ways. And so, again, some of you may remember last year, those of you who like salads, especially Caesar salads, that romaine lettuce had a really big E. coli outbreak last spring. And Walmart, like most grocers did, had to throw away 100% of its romaine just to be safe. Now, food safety and food security is an issue that impacts us all. Obviously there's keeping everybody healthy, but for Walmart, there's also saving money, right? What if they were able to pinpoint exactly which bags of lettuce came from which farm that were contaminated? They could just cherry pick those and leave the rest of the romaine untouched. And so they've been testing for a couple of years now, blockchain for supply chains, working with IBM to keep track of spinach and lettuce. By fall 2019, more than 100 farms that supply Walmart will be required to input information about their food into a blockchain database that IBM has developed for Walmart and other retailers and other food manufacturers like Dole, Wegmans, Unilever, etc. And so, what's interesting about this is that supply chain, using blockchain to secure the supply chain is something that not only retailers are interested in, but a lot of humanitarian organizations. So for example, Pfizer donates a pallet of drugs, being able to track to make sure it actually reaches that children's hospital in Rwanda rather than getting skimmed off the top or getting sent, to a place it wasn't intended for, is really meaningful for big humanitarian organizations. Next slide, please. So other places, of course, that are interested, diamonds, the diamond industry, blood diamonds, of course, is still a concern in making sure that music, the arts, making sure that blockchain, where is that music coming from and where is it actually getting sold, to reduce piracy, but also make sure artists are being compensated. These are some other places that it's happening. Personally, I think I mentioned already that I'm involved as an advisory board member of StemChain.io, and StemChain.io is about bringing blockchain technology, but also crypto funds to STEM organizations. So their largest partner is STEM.org, which is the biggest STEM organization, STEM's, of course, standing for science, technology, engineering, and math around the country, and setting curriculum in schools. But there's also Coded by Kids, Carrot, Science Cheerleader, a whole raft of organizations that help children. Next slide. I'm also a founding member, along with some other folks on the call, like Roz and Cameron, in the Hyperledger Social Impact Working Group. Hyperledger.org is a huge international open source platform for blockchain. Over 270 companies, nonprofits, and universities are members. Amazon has actually created blockchain as a service. You've heard of software as a service. There's blockchain as a service now. And they're using Hyperledger and Ethereum as its base. And they just launched that in November. So it's not even 6 months old. But the Social Impact Working Group specifically has other forming members besides, us squirrels here on this call, including IBM, Accenture, World Vision, Mercy Corps, Relief International, Kiva, the Norwegian Refugee Council. You're probably hearing a theme here, right? Which is, these large either refugee or humanitarian orgs that are trying to help move people. They're moving goods, they're moving services across great distances. And DLT, or distributed ledger technologies, which is another name for blockchain, the Social Impact Working Group believes that it offers significant potential to deliver benefits for humanitarian aid, development, civil society, and that by increasing transparency and improving the flow of data, that it can really reduce costs and promote efficiencies that will allow this aid to reach more people and improve outcomes, and including reducing corruption. So the idea here of the working group is to identify these specific opportunities, develop use cases that have high potential, and share them with the world. These are just on this slide. These are just a random handful of the types of people, including some of the folks on the call who are involved in the Hyperledger project. Roz, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. Cordell, I'll throw the same question to you. What do you see as kind of current most promising use cases for blockchain technology, or where are you already seeing this impact causes in your world?
Well, I'm super excited about the governmental sector. One of the key underpinnings for a democratic society, or say another word, organized society, is transparency. I have to believe in what you're doing for me, by me, in my name, such that I will continue to comply. So trust is a big issue. Now, the word trust is very important when it comes to networks of any kind. If you talk to some of your more passionate early founding members of the internet, it was built on trust. This node has to trust that node. And somehow in our era of platform dominance, the whole trust piece is missing. And so as we listen to these debates about privacy and who guarantees a person's individual rights and who can say what online, we're getting back to trust, that fundamental issue that is not technical at all, but very human. Any society needs it to function. So I will get to that in my fourth example, but I want to start with the three organizations that I work very closely with, somewhat related. And so NG, this is, it was based in Chattanooga, but moved to Puerto Rico after the catastrophic hurricane back in, I want to say, was that 2 years ago? Or maybe perhaps even last year. Moved there. This is a startup in the philanthropic space. This is where I spent a lot of my time professionally. They set out a mission to how can I help nonprofits raise money cheaper. Most nonprofits are in constant fundraising mode or spending 40% of their time and resources raising more money. Obviously, that's very inefficient. And so they are big music guys. They were in bands. And that's how I met them in Chattanooga. They were performing live. I thought they were great, and I would go hear them. Love anything live. And they said, we have this idea of making a new MTV. And I said, tell me more. And they said, okay, we're going to beam online and get these different bands that love, say, like the Children's Hospital or the YMCA, to get all their followers to come to watch them online. And every like is a coin that's created that goes to that nonprofit that's being sponsored for the hour. So as many fans liked it, that these coins are created, it's in Ethereum, and then conceivably, this has value. This value for that nonprofit can be traded, sold, or whatever. But the beauty of it is that nonprofit didn't have to do anything to get it. It just had a band that loved them and wanted to help. Their fans came and enjoyed the music and liked them. And that became a fundable event for them. Now, writ large, this would be huge for nonprofits. Another way of raising money, in a very cost-effective way. And so them moving to Puerto Rico They said, we want a live case study. And they were invited to come down to try this method to help rebuild the schools in Puerto Rico. And I don't know if you're all familiar, but Puerto Rico was absolutely decimated by that Hurricane Maria and still rebuilding. There's a lot of people without electricity. So if there was ever a place to try something this radical, that would be the place. And so I've been following the progress very carefully and closely. And I'm so proud of those young men of giving it all up and betting the business on the worst case example of how philanthropy can help rebuild and using blockchain to do it. This is a very, very cool initiative. The other one is Blue Well. This is an emblem in the upper upper right. This is a Seoul, Korea-based organization. It's called Blue Well Foundation, started by a guy named Will Lee. And he and I met last year in Seoul. And he's willing to gig economy work. So there's this notion of people being freelancers. He's building a blockchain-based freelance system where people can get proper value for their services, if you will, and live this kind of global new age hobo type of life where they're trading services. Say I build websites and a Mazatlan-based organization needs a website. Well, they have a facility that can host me. I would trade my services in exchange for a 6-week vacation there. And so imagine going back to old school trading and bartering, using the blockchain and getting the right value for your work rather than being shortchanged because you are not a full-time employee. And so it's a very utopian idea, but it has some legs. Why? Because during Seoul, Korea, there's a lot of attention there, and there's hundreds of thousands of people using this platform now. So please check out Blue Well Foundation. At some point, I hope to utilize them personally. I think they're doing some great work. On to more governmental focused things. This is simple, spelled with a C. It's based out of Lagos, Nigeria. And it was created actually just for one company. It was a company, an oil company that was felt it wasn't getting a fair shake when it came to tax collection. Say it euphorically like that. And this idea is that they were basically being taxed by all these different levels of government, which is accurate. You have federal, you have state, you have local. But the same organizations were taxed them multiple times because they couldn't trust the tax collectors. So tax collectors actually come, they present their credentials, and you pay your tax, you get a receipt or not. And the same person will come back and say, you didn't pay. I'm like, I did pay, you do remember me. And this has been going on for years and years and years. It's a very common way that business is done in that part of the world as it relates to multinational corporations. Well, Simple has built a blockchain ledger that shows every time you pay a tax, you scan the barcode for that tax collector. That creates a receipt that is now publicly projected in the headquarters of the taxation authority, right? So imagine that everyone gets to see exactly how much this, say, BP paid in this tax. And so if someone else from that agency comes, they scan it again, but that person now you have direct evidence of graft. It's a behavioral change mechanism like none other. And so a typical company is dealing with 35 different taxation authorities and logos. And the hope is that this particular practice of getting people accustomed to seeing exactly how their government is functioning and exactly what they're collecting will ultimately change the behavior of the government. And so I mentioned UNDP here. Back in September, this is September 24th, 2018, UNDP Asia partnered with the blockchain charity organization to partner officially on UNDP work in that region. So they'll be using blockchain technologies to take better account of refugees, of services being delivered. I mean, you're talking about a revolutionary approach to the UN's work, much more efficient. A lot of the criticism against the UN is that it's not efficient. As we know, dealing with any human being is going to be a challenge. It's just a lot of personal work you have to do, and some of these things can't be captured easily with technology, but I think blockchain gives you an opportunity to do that. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about what I see as like the most promising thing. And I get back to trust, consent of the governed. I know these are democratic principles that we espouse all the time, but it also works in this space. If I truly believe that the government is working on behalf and I can believe, and I can see it, if I'm taking part in it, I'm participating in it, I mean, this is democracy 101. And I think that is the most promising area. Anything that builds trust is going to change the world for us. And so that's what I'm most hopeful for.
It's great. And Cameron, I didn't mean to leave you last on all these rounds, but I'll throw the same question your direction, which is, what do you see as the most promising use cases, and where are you seeing it have an impact already?
Sure, can I have the next slide? Where I see the most promise is in three main areas. The first is impact measurement. I have a personal goal towards that. The second one is distributed identity. It's also known as self-sovereign identity. And the third is in mission delivery / supply chain management. So in terms of impact measurement, you can think of that as like kind of a way to determine the ROI for grant makers and potential donors and volunteers. Like, how have your efforts contributed towards our goals? What they can do is they can have their attestations of impact put onto the blockchain and signed and become part of the chain, where you can state for a fact that here's the number of children that have graduated 8th grade that have attended our program, or here's the number of meals served this quarter, or the percentage of children vaccinated. They can all be recorded in the ledger where anyone can discover these attestations, and as long as both sides have agreed on that, they become just part of the record. Tying that to smart contracts stored on the blockchain fits really nicely in this model. Smart contracts are self-executing contracts, and they directly control the transfer of digital currencies and assets between the parties under certain conditions. So you can set these up to kind of deliver stages of funding from the grant maker to the grant seeker when other milestones have been hit, like saying, once you have attested to my conditions and you've supplied the right documentation, then we're going to deliver the first round of funding. Once you've attested that those funds were used to procure the resources that you need, we'll release the second round of funding, that type of thing. And all this stuff just happens automatically. It's all become part of the blockchain, and it's programmatically set to just execute once the conditions have met. So it really simplifies reporting and compliance, and it really simplifies the process of getting your assets to the places where it needs to be. It increases, using smart contracts and so on, increases transparency and trust, like Cordell was saying before. And overall, it just increases faith in the whole process as a whole. In terms of distributed identity, this is kind of interesting because this can be used in many different ways, both individually and organization-wide. Basically, what you do is you can store your verified credentials and attestations, like your college degrees or other certifications, on the blockchain. You can store your government IDs. You can, anything that you want to prove that you are who you are and you have the credentials that you say you have. That's a great fit for something on the blockchain. Organizations as well can attest they meet things like equivalence determinations in order to receive donations from U.S. companies and individuals. This helps out in the KYC, know your customer process. It also is being actively used by several startups for refugee camps, where they've had to flee their home country and they have nothing but literally the clothes on their back. So there's a company called BankQ, which has a marketplace where refugees can kind of build up their own digital economic profile, where over time, as they conduct transactions with each other, they build a profile that can be leveraged to access actual financial and government services later on. You're kind of building up your credit history, but it's available for refugees, which would not be available before. Another big use case is in land registries, where it could be used for something like small plot farmers and land mapping, where access to finance is hard, especially in third world countries where the lack of rights and outdated property registries exist. There's companies that are piloting a blockchain right now to enable solution for people like women farmers in Latin America that would never have gotten a chance to own a small plot of land and farm it themselves. In terms of mission delivery, supply chain management, as Cheryl discussed, the blockchain has great promise in this area, especially around the sourcing, the distribution of the material, human capital, financial resources, the tracking of it all throughout the whole lifetime in the process, and also of impact measurement. We're partnering currently, Blackbaud is, with Microsoft to deliver new capabilities this year. It's called Nonprofit Resource Management, and the first module is goods distribution. So we'll be looking to use the tracking, the source, the destination, the outputs, and recording them all using blockchain technologies to make it all transparent and be able to do just-in-time planning and resource management for all leveraging the blockchain.
Super, that's great. Okay, can we go to the next slide? So that was a lot of examples, just, you know, in a few minutes from a few people. There is a great report that was done by Mercy Corps. It was 2017, so early days, but still a really good reference. They looked at that time sort of all what they thought were kind of various projected uses of blockchain for social good, and kind of documented what was in place at that time. And they boiled it down to, they thought there was like 3 big areas of opportunity. New ways to give. We haven't talked about that too much so far. A little bit of grant management and gift management fundraising mixed in there. But that sort of ebbed and flowed, I think, in interest with cryptocurrency. So new ways to give, new ways to build trust. We talked a lot about that, and new ways to address social problems. I think the getting goods to folks in refugee camps is a great example of that. So the Mercy Corps report is definitely recommended reading, kind of foundational. In the resources section at the end, I presume we'll send the deck around. There's a link to that as well as some other great resources. There are a couple of organizations that have appeared recently, including IXO and Alice, really focused on tracking outcomes, kind of similar to what you were talking about, Cameron, using blockchain. So, you know, organizations said they were going to do X, we're tracking their results through the system, and they can verify that they delivered X. So there's definitely kind of a new crop of organizations coming up to track that proof of delivery and track impact through the system. So those are a couple more interesting sort of references to go check out as well. Okay, why don't we move on to our next question for panelists. You can go to the next slide. All right, so so we did talk a lot of the examples that you all shared so far were more about blockchain as public ledger for contracts, identity management, less so currency, or currency was kind of a, you know, a footnote to those examples. But, you know, starting out, the most famous example of use of blockchain was Bitcoin, and cryptocurrencies more generally. So, and going back a little more than a year, there was this crop of crypto billionaires. There was the Pineapple Fund that one of those folks started, which has given, I think, close to $60 million in cryptocurrencies so far to charities. So there's still definitely something going on with crypto, and yet it remains largely unregulated. There's big fluctuations in value, famously used to facilitate all kinds of illegal trade. So some good and bad. So I want to ask the panel, talk about cryptocurrency specifically. Is crypto still too early and unstable to think about using this for social good? Or is there a potential today in the use of cryptocurrency for social good impact? Since we've been ending with you, Cameron, you want to start us out, and we'll go Cameron, Cordell, Cheryl.
Sure. So I think it definitely holds some promise, but I think it's still very early. I think where you're going to get the most movement on is in the area of like grassroots social investing, especially as the popularity of P2P, which is person-to-person payment, grows. Individuals tend to have a higher tolerance to try out new things, especially when they're trying to make an impact and upset the existing system. As new methods to use and consume cryptocurrencies emerge, like ATM cards or actual Visa and MasterCards, where you can, you know, use them to actually purchase things using your cryptocurrencies, I think you'll see the usage of cryptocurrency expand quickly in the individual philanthropic area. As far as the corporate side, it's quite a bit more murky. We saw payment provider Stripe. They struggled to adopt coins like Bitcoin as a currency because it's so unstable, and they ended up dropping that strategy and began calling it an asset. So the difference between a currency and an asset is huge in terms of regulatory compliance. So it's really tough for a company like Blackbaud to do much today, as that uncertainty is revolving, and the SEC still hasn't made determinations on whether to call it a currency or an asset. So even getting to a point of giving advice on how to handle it for a nonprofit, let alone facilitating transactions, it's just so much unknown that it's promising. We're going to watch it, but we're going to tread lightly, basically, is what our stance is right now for our corporate's sponsorship.
Yeah, I echo Cameron's tentativeness on this particular issue. It's so early in the process. That said, I go back to the example of NG in Puerto Rico. There are places where the situation is so dire, they literally will try anything that's going to move the ball forward towards something that looks like a reasonable way to exist as a human being. And so I say, let's throw everything at situations like that. I would argue that's the same with refugee crisis around the country. I just returned from El Paso this past weekend, and I saw some things in my country that made my skin crawl. I just could not believe how many people were under these bridges at the border of El Paso and Juarez. And I guarantee you they're not going to wait for an SEC determination. They will take it all. And for those situations, very, very dire situations, this is where you need some risk-taking with respect to getting more resources there. That said, I do foresee an evolution towards asset-based cryptocurrency. The regulators are going to have to do something because it's just exploding. People are losing money. They're making a lot of money very quickly. There's some charlatans out there. And so this notion of having it backed by something, be it real estate or maybe just shares of something that is tangible, is going to be where we land. That's just my prediction. And my greatest hope for that is that these neighborhoods across cities in America that are quickly gentrifying, so much so that the existing citizens or residents are being forced out because taxes rise too quickly. I would love it if they could own a piece of what they lost via some virtual coin that is connected to the rising value of these neighborhoods that some of them are not able to stay in. So one of my pet projects is on that particular issue right now. How do you build an asset-based virtual coin for a low-income community that you want to develop in, and knowing that its development may force some of them out just because of taxes.
I'll go next. My personal belief is that the cryptocurrency sort of milieu is in a Napster moment, right? And some of us are old enough on this call to remember Napster versus the Recording Industry Association of America, right? And, the RIAA, I mean, they were just like, this whole Napster thing has got to go. And they worked really hard for years to crush Napster and the whole idea of streaming music. And yet today, not only do we have streaming music everywhere, it is a huge part of the music industry. We even have voice activated music streaming via Alexa and Google Home and other devices. So, I think that a lot of folks learn their lesson from that battle. What we see behind the scenes is that some of the people most involved in understanding blockchain and leveraging it are central banks, financial institutions. If you look at who's involved with Hyperledger, there are a lot of banks, involved in that. So, I do think that stability will come. It's just like with streaming music, cryptocurrency is going to be a really big part of how we live our lives and run our businesses, and will impact, value and how people are able to donate and the assets that they have to donate. But it's going to be a while. We're 10, 20 years out, maybe, from that reality. And it's important to remember that cryptocurrency is just an application. It's just one application of the underlying technology, which is blockchain. And while, crypto has the power to potentially, unleash, new wealth, reduce corruption, create transparency, reduce waste, there are a lot of other problems that blockchain can be applied to. crypto is just one of them. So I'm really excited to see, what happens next. The Pineapple Fund is closed for now. 55 million, I guess, was all that person had to give away. But and a lot of us, Cameron, your story about losing your wallet, I mean, I think anyone who's been involved in early crypto there's even a Big Bang Theory episode that's about losing a wallet. I too have lost some Stellars. I don't know where those are. But that whole situation is going to get, I think, smoothed out very soon.
Cool. Thanks for that. Maybe there'll be some service for finding the crypto between your couch cushions at some point. Okay, so I said there would be time for Q&A. So we can go to the next slide. And there is. We've been getting great questions in the chat. So I'm gonna channel some of those from the audience. I don't actually know how to unmute you and ask you. One really interesting one for anyone: how many nodes are needed to make any particular blockchain tech application effective? In other words, could a particular blockchain application in the social good or any context be effective with, say, 10 people using it, or is there a critical mass of users needed to make it effective? Does anyone have?
In terms of nodes, like as in a private blockchain or privately hosted blockchain, yeah, you typically would need a little bit more than that. But most of the tech that we're talking about is based on the public blockchain. And so there's already hundreds of thousands of nodes out there. So they're typically built on top of the Ethereum blockchain, which is well established. So as long as you're building on top of that you're fine.
Great. Cordell, you had mentioned asset-based crypto. Is there a company or who's kind of leading on asset-based crypto? Is that?
Yeah, there's an organization out in San Francisco. I believe they're called RE, R-E. And they essentially are creating derivatives of apartments because, real estate is so expensive in San Francisco. And so I don't know if they own the building or if they own the lease, but they figured out a way to create shares, equity shares of these real estate holdings such that people can benefit from rising rents. But that's the only one that I know of. I'm sure there are more out there. But I'm very pleased that they're doing so well, because I think it bodes well for folks that want to do economic development in opportunity zones around the country. There are 10,000 of them, and there's federal funding for projects. The question is, will the federal government be as risk-taking as these entrepreneurs want to be?
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
There's a question early on, who can participate in blockchain?
Sure, actually, that's Rue Map. Hi, Rue. But I think because it requires a certain level of sophistication, both technical, a little bit financial, I think it's, it's outside of the reach still, of normal people, much like, the early web, right? Was, ideally you knew a little bit of HTML, or even early Twitter. Early Twitter was, with the hashtags and the syntax and the @ symbols, like it wasn't a thing, ordinary people really had to, essentially get trained and build their knowledge of what any of that, how any of that worked from a technical standpoint. So I think it's a little bit the same thing. I think that there are a lot of ways in which folks are trying to, democratize blockchain and bring it into the hands of ordinary people in a way that brings benefit to them. But I think we're still waiting for that, that killer app, as it were, to get there. One that might be easy for folks, at least in terms of crypto, would be, it's called Board, BRD. It's an app that makes it easy to convert your dollars to Bitcoin or to Ethereum or other, in terms of just crypto.
That is great. And Rue had a follow-up question, which Cameron or Cadell, you might have an opinion on. For nonprofits, what might be a typical investment or on-ramp timing to use blockchain for partner, donor, community impact measurement?
time frame wise, the hardest part is mapping out your current process and what the analog would be in the smart tank or smart contract language. So if you've got a fairly well-defined process already, you're already, you know, leaps and bounds ahead of most everybody else. So it's just kind of defining what your data points are that you want to be on the blockchain, how important they are. Can they trigger certain stages of a smart contract to kick off? So it's pretty much, there's a lot of upfront planning before you even get into looking at the technology to implement it. So it all depends on how far along you are on having a well-defined process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that one other than impact measurement is hard anyway for nonprofits. I know the Aspen Institute is working through that across the 73 programs right now. And so whatever framework that you have in place, I would say this lays over somewhat easily because the outcomes are changed. I mean, they don't change just because the technology did. And so hopefully you have a framework in place already that will give you some type of measures that your donors and stakeholders are expecting.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. You don't necessarily have to build the technology yourself. There's certainly some orgs and companies working on that. I mentioned Alex and IXO. There's also Promise Giving. So maybe look at those three, and then, you know, we'll see. there may be other entrants in the market in the near future. I'm sure there will be that will help organizations track. But you gotta, to Cameron's point, you gotta have those milestones and what are the actual outcomes you're trying to create. That can be the most difficult part, even if you have the technology there. Okay, here's a fun one. For a philanthropist who wants to donate, what are the pros and cons of donating via crypto?
I think the biggest one is stability of the pricing in like Bitcoin. So the wild fluctuations actually encourage nonprofits receiving those funds to cash them out immediately, which basically takes them off the blockchain, and that removes the whole transparency aspect that everybody's trying to keep on there. There's some strategies around that. You can hedge that by using coins that are tied to fiat currency like US coin, which guarantees that it's a $1 to $1 no matter what time. You know, if you donate $10, it's always going to be worth $10 when they cash it out, type of thing.
I want to just applaud Ravi for asking that question, and I hope that you actually are in a position to help out.
So let me do a couple more since we're coming up on the hour. On what timeline do you see this change happening? This, you know, per the Stanford Social Innovation Review doc I mentioned, this was really just in its very kind of infancy crawl stages last year. What do you all expect to see in 2019 and beyond?
Well, I expect to see more clarity from the SEC. I think they're going to have to weigh in definitively on, you know, how will they classify this? I mean, their job is to ensure transparency, that the folks aren't being defrauded, that a company that sells something to the public is legitimate. And so there's a lot of questions about what do you do with the fluctuating value and how much risk are people going to walk into. What I hope doesn't happen is that they say only accredited investors can engage in this because of the risks involved. I think that would be very, very dangerous for the market and for the crypto market. And I think that's wrong directionally. I understand why they would do it, but I hope they don't.
Yeah. Cheryl or Cameron, you want to weigh in on your predictions?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of real big movements in areas that are more well understood, like supply chain management. I mean, Cheryl's already demonstrated that big companies like Walmart and so on are jumping into this, you know, head first. IBM has got a solution already out. There just was a huge blockchain supply chain summit in Chicago in beginning of April. All kinds of industry leaders are they're focusing on something that's just tangible and that it's well understood. So I think you're going to see a lot of momentum and movement on that this year, just from the supply chain management.
Yeah, things are moving fast, in this world, but a lot of it, much like AI, a lot of blockchain is happening behind the scenes in the B2B world. And we're probably, several years, maybe 5-10 years before blockchain really being, same as AI, something that, normal people see and, that consumers experience and see, in a tangible way, as opposed to just experiencing, wow, all of a sudden my Amazon package, I can track it, from, where is specifically it is it on the truck? That kind of thing.
Cool. All right, so to wrap, I think we're going to talk about what folks can do sort of coming out of this hour. So can you share like 1 or 2 recommendations that people who participated here or are watching this recording online could go do or read to try to get started leveraging blockchain for social good?
Well, one thing I would suggest is to really track the UN. They have Blockchain for Impact Summit coming up at the United Nations headquarters on June the 4th. And they're actually starting to hire a whole team of blockchain specialists to actively engage with the UNDP and UNDHCP that does the refugees. You're about to see blockchain go to big time for social impact. And so I would track what they're doing and try to apply it to issues we're trying to solve in our own communities.
Great. There's a bunch of resources here, but also in the chat. Thanks so much to Justin Paul from INGI for joining. Paul Lamb mentioned a couple of things. Also, John Breault, added a link, and we'll try to add all of those into the deck when we send around. On this slide here, the things that are underlined are actually links. So you'll be able to actually go and check out that Mercy Corps report, the Blockchain for Social Impact, Stanford Social Innovation Review article, this framework, the rest of this. There's also, in addition to the summit that Cordell mentioned, the blockchain for social impact.com. It's all one word. They're actually having a summit in June as well. Really important, and I think it's getting bigger every year. We sent a couple of Do Big Things folks there last year. The blockchain for social justice, if you look that up online, they're San Francisco based. There's also the Hyperledger meetup that we mentioned that is still open to folks. So go ahead and check that out. And thank you, Peter, for that nod to putting things in the historical perspective. I think that we're living through a seismic shift. Mm-hmm. I think.
All right. Oh.
She stepped into the matrix.
Yeah.
Should we head to the next slide? We're wrapping up.
Yep, we lost your audio for one hot second, but we are at the top of the hour. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Cheryl, do you want to say anything about keeping in touch?
Sure. So as we mentioned, we'll send this out via email, and it will also be accessible online. Please do feel free to share. Please do tweet and mention at Do Big Things, at Blackbaud, at Aspen Institute. Use the hashtag Blockchain for Good, which is being used not just by us, but there's a whole community out there. They're also using hashtag DLT, the number 4. Good is another online community on Twitter and elsewhere. Please do join our email list, and you'll get more opportunities for free webinars. Share it with your friends. I think that's it. Anything else from panelists?
Thanks to all of our panelists for joining, and thank you for everyone who participated in the webinar.
You guys are awesome. Thank you, friends.